So today we're going to talk about contrary motion scales. It's one of the things that pianists learn that guitar players don't learn, and I think it's really important for guitarists to understand contrary motion because classical music, classical guitar music, and classical music in general, it has lots of contrary motion. Contrary motion simply means that one voice goes down while another voice goes up, or one line goes down, if you want to think of it that way, and the other line goes up. And a really easy way to practice that and to start thinking about this and noticing it in your music is by doing contrary motion scales. So we're going to talk about contrary motion scales today. We could see, even in something like the simple Bach Bourrée in E minor, he has contrary motion right at the beginning. It's a contrary motion scale. G, F sharp, E in the bass going down, and on top, E, F sharp, G going up. And there's lots of examples in Bach of contrary motion, and there's lots of examples of other composers because they got a lot of their ideas from J.S. Bach, and the earlier composers. So contrary motion is a very important element of classical music that we want to start paying attention to. And this is why I wrote out these scales. So the first one I wrote out, these are beginning scales in contrary motion. So we start off, if you've never done this before, these would be the best ones to start with, these beginning scales. I've written out some more advanced ones as well. But we can see right off the bat that this note, which has two stems, you can see it has an upward stem and a lower stem. And that just simply means, sometimes you see that in the repertoire as well, that simply means that this voice goes up, but this note also is splitting apart and going down, right? So that's why it's written as two stems. This is your top line going up, but it's also, this note represents the beginning of the bottom line going down. All right, so let me play this contrary motion scale, simple little scale in C major. Right, and we have it in G major. D major. A major, I'll stop there. Right, so they sound very nice. The thing about it is, the technical aspect of playing it, yes, you have to be aware that you're closer to the neck, and, if you have any questions about that, you can go and look at some of my videos in terms of the left-hand technique, holding fingers in a relaxed way when you're playing these, stretching your fingers out, getting ready, right? So technically, there's elements to work on, but the important thing, in my opinion, with these scales is to try to really think about the notes you're playing and be aware of what the notes are so that you can say to yourself, okay, I see how this C goes down to B, and then it goes to A in the bass, and then it goes to G in the bass, and then it goes to F. Okay, I see that. Now let me look at the top line. C goes up to D, goes up to E, goes to F, G. And then see if you can think the notes together. Now that's more difficult, but that's the idea. C goes down to B, but up to D. Goes down to A, but up to E. Goes down to G, but up to F. Goes down to F, but up to G. Right? Now, just so you know, like in terms of organizing, when I'm thinking about music, I'm always thinking of music lower voice to higher voice. So I don't get confused, right? I don't think, okay, D and B, and then, okay, A and E, and then F and G. I don't think of it that way. I always remind myself to spell it the same exact way. So C, B and D, A and E, G and F and G, and then reverse. Okay? That might be helpful because I notice a lot of people spell things randomly. You want to spell things when you're thinking about notes and thinking about movement and you're doing something confusing like this. You want to find a way that you spell things exactly the same way every single time. You don't want to think sometimes from the top down and then sometimes from the base up. Either do base up all the time or top down all the time. It's up to you. Okay, now we get into more advanced scales in contrary motion. And these are scales for people that, you're beyond being a beginner and you've already done, let's say, the Segovia scales, and you're learning the fretboard and you're getting to learn music. I'm saying it's advanced, but these are for intermediate. These aren't like super advanced. They get more advanced in the next page. But all this is an extension of what we just did. We still think about the notes, but now we extend. Try to keep thinking about the notes, right? G major. Keep ending up on the octave. And D major. Try to make them smooth. You'll notice in this area of D major, whoops, let me get this drawing tool. Okay, so this area of D major, you'll see the first finger is on the first string, and then it jumps down to the fifth string here, right? The first finger. And when you have situations like this in this exercise, you can use bars. That's what I'm doing in the D major scale. Bar, right? And then bar back. Okay, so these scales, they have fingering. I don't put in the fingering for the second half a lot of the time because I want people to try to think of the notes and beyond the fingering. If you need to write it in the fingering, that's fine. But just, ultimately you want to get to the point where you're thinking about the notes you're playing and not just the fingering. All right, so then in this page, what we're doing is we're starting off with a third. See, you can see it says here thirds through tenths. So we start off with a third and we go all the way up an octave until we get this really wide tenth. This is actually a tenth plus an octave, right? Still based on thirds, C and E and C and E, right? So it's just E to E up an octave and then C to C down an octave. Now these are more advanced and they require more stretching, and you might find that the first page of this is enough, but I find these to be even more interesting because harmonically ending up with thirds and tenths, this is more common in a lot of compositions. They'll end up on these kinds of intervals. So the contrary motion scales based on these intervals, I think, is quite helpful. So now we start with thirds, C major, and we keep thinking about the scales down. Down. G major. And D major. I can keep going, but you get the idea, right? So these scales, learn the fingering, but more importantly, pay attention to the notes you're playing. And the reason why is because once you get this idea down, and once you're, aware of the notes you're playing, and once you're, clear about how the scales are constructed, which is, a very simple idea, then what you do is you go over to the without fingering, advanced scales in contrary motion without fingering. Now this gets really tricky. And what you try to do is you try to think of the scales in different positions of the guitar. right? So C and then B and D, then A and E, right? F and G, or I should say G and F, F and G, E and A, and then we have this, right? Or it could be here. This requires knowledge of the guitar and also a keen interest in the scale itself. So, you can start off with a scale, let's say in this position, and then base the contrary motion around that scale, right? But the important thing is, if you're more advanced, is you're obviously not thinking of fingering, you're just thinking about the notes. That's a much more advanced approach to this, is you don't think of the fingering, you just think of the notes and where are they on the guitar, right? Like if I do G, F sharp, E and B, D and C, C and D, right? B and E, A and F sharp, and G and G. Right? I'm out of tune. Back. Oh, sorry. Yeah, B and E, C and D, D and C, E and B, F sharp and A, and finally G. So I'm not thinking of fingering, I'm just thinking, okay, what are the notes I need to play? And then where are those notes on the fretboard? That's a much more advanced way to think of it. But if you can do that, even with mistakes as I've made, even if you just use it as a brain teaser, try to see if you can do it, you'll find that, being able to think this way is extremely important. If I take, let's take this D major in thirds, right? Like if I start up here, can I think about the notes without looking at the notes maybe, right? Sharp and D, G and C sharp, A and B, B and A, C sharp and G, and then D sharp and F. Right? Now, I'm thinking about the notes in the scale, and then I'm finding them before I play them. Being able to think ahead like that, and being able to be very clear about what the next note should be in your scale, it's more advanced than what a lot of people can do, but if you can do it, even if you make mistakes, if you practice doing it, to be able to think this way as you're playing the guitar, beyond the fingering, that's an extremely high level of musicianship as far as I'm concerned. I need to work on it myself, but it's a fun brain teaser. That's what you want to be. You want to be so familiar with the scales that you can think of them in contrary motion, and so familiar with the fretboard that you can find the notes. Yeah, I've seen some great guitar players do this in master classes, where a student's having problem with the fingering, and the great guitarist comes up with 5 fingerings right away. How do they do that? They know the fretboard and they know the music quickly, because they know the patterns of the music, and then they know the fretboard pattern very well. So you get those two combined, you are doing really well as a guitar player. Okay, so that's all for today. Short lesson. These are all available at Dropbox. I'll put them in the description under YouTube, and I hope you enjoy them.